Today, we're going to dig into a crime that absolutely captivated the world. It's one of those cases that seemed totally open and shut, but it was hiding a secret. A secret so deep it would take 100 years of silence before science could finally speak the truth.
And that right there, that quote, it just perfectly sums up this whole story. Because just when you think you've got it all figured out, history and more importantly science are about to throw a curveball that changes, well, literally everything.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's London, a cold night, January 31st, 1910. We're at the home of a Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen and his wife, Belle. They're in the middle of a dinner party, and on the surface, everything seems fine, normal even. But underneath all that polite chatter, a major storm is brewing between two very different people.
So you've got Dr. Crippen. He's this quiet, kinda passive guy. The type who gets walked all over, especially by his wife. And then there's Belle. She is his total opposite. I mean, flamboyant, an aspiring actress who had to be the center of attention. Put those two together, yeah, their marriage was basically a recipe for disaster.
And that disaster, it absolutely exploded that night. After the guests finally leave, a furious argument just erupts. Belle is taunting him, comparing him to her old lovers, just brutal stuff. And then she screams it. She's done. She's leaving him the next day. Now look, she'd threatened this before, but this time it would be her last. And just like that dinner party became the very last time any of Belle's friends ever saw her alive. So it looks like her threat to leave finally came true, right? Well, maybe. But the story of how she supposedly left, that started to get really, really strange and fast.
See, the story that Dr. Crippen started telling just kept changing. First he says, Belle had to rush to America. A relative is sick. Okay. But then, just a few weeks later, he's out at a ball with his young assistant, Ethel, on his arm. Then the story changes again. Now Belle has suddenly gotten sick and died over in America. You can imagine for her friends, this went from concern to deep, deep suspicion real quick. So Belle's friends, they weren't letting this go. They kept the pressure on. And after months of saying, hey, something is seriously wrong here, Scotland Yard finally caves. They assign one of their top guys to the case, Inspector Walter Dew. And this guy was a big deal. He was famous for his work on the Jack the Ripper investigation.
So Inspector Dew finally sits down with Dr. Crippen. And what does he get? Yep, another story. Crippen basically says, okay, everything I said before was a lie. The real truth, he claims, is that Belle did just leave him that night, and he made up all those other stories to avoid the scandal. And you know what? He played the part of the embarrassed, heartbroken husband so well that Inspector Dew, he actually bought it. But that wasn't the end of it. Just 5 days later, the inspector goes back for a quick follow-up, and he finds the house empty. Dr. Crippen and his mistress Ethel are gone. They vanished. And that changed everything. I mean, why would an innocent man run? Suddenly, this isn't a missing persons case anymore. It is a full-blown manhunt. So Inspector Dew heads straight back to the Crippen house, but this time he's not messing around. He's doing a much more thorough search. He goes down into this dark, damp basement, and that's when something catches his eye. A few bricks near the fireplace. They just look out of place, disturbed. So he grabs a poker and starts tapping along the floor. You can just imagine it. Thump, thump. And then, a sound that's completely different. A hollow sound. He knew right then and there he'd found something.
And what they found under those bricks was just pure horror. They uncovered human remains, but it was so bizarre. It was just organs and a large piece of skin. That's it. No head, no arms or legs, no bones at all. But what they did find was incredibly damning. They found strands of hair that matched Belle's, a piece of skin with a birthmark that matched one she had. They even found pieces of Dr. Crippen's own pajamas mixed in and traces of a tranquilizer that he, and only he, had access to from his job.
So, with this mountain of evidence, the case looked solved, right? Dr. Crippen and Ethel were caught on a ship trying to get to America. Their trial became a massive media sensation. It really seemed like a totally open and shut case.
And the jury? They agreed. Based on everything found in his basement, Dr. Holly Harvey Crippen was found guilty of murder. The sentence was death by hanging. And to the public, it felt like justice had finally been served.
And for almost 100 years, that's exactly where the story ended. The quiet, meek doctor who finally snapped and kills his overbearing wife. Case closed. But the story was nowhere near over. A whole century would have to pass.
And then modern science was going to take a second look at this infamous crime, and it was about to uncover a secret that was buried even deeper than those remains in the basement. Think about that. For 100 years, nobody questioned the verdict. In fact, the actual evidence from that basement was preserved in a museum in London, like some kind of grim trophy from a famously solved case. But for a few people who really looked closely at the facts, some things just never, ever added up.
Criminologists, for example, were always kind of bothered by the details. I mean, think about it. If you're going to go to the trouble of getting rid of the head, the limbs, the bones, all the identifiable parts, why in the world would you keep the organs and bury them in your own basement? And here's another thing. If you killed someone with poison, which is supposed to look like a natural death, why would you then go and mutilate the body? It makes no sense.
Well, flash forward to 2010, a forensic scientist decides, you know what, it's time to get some real answers. He manages to get a sample of that preserved tissue from the museum, the exact tissue that sent Dr. Crippen to the gallows 100 years before.
So he extracts mitochondrial DNA from that old tissue, and he compares it to a DNA sample from one of Bell's living grandnieces. The result? It was a bombshell. It was not a match. Let me say that again. The body they found in Dr. Crippen's basement was not his wife Bell.
Okay, let that sink in. Dr. Crippen was executed for murdering his wife, but the body in the basement wasn't even her. And believe it or not, that wasn't even the biggest shock.
Further analysis proved that the remains, they weren't even female. The body in the basement was male. The entire foundation of the case, the whole story that led to a man's execution, was completely 100% wrong.
What this means is that an innocent man, Dr. Crippen, was executed for a crime he did not commit. He ran because he was scared of a scandal, and that fear is what ultimately led him to the gallows. And because of that, the real mystery was never even looked at. And so that leaves us with these huge, haunting questions. The case of Dr. Crippen, it turns out, isn't the story of a murderer who got caught. It's the story of a mystery that was never even investigated. So who was the man buried in that basement? And what really truly happened to Bell after she walked out that door in 1910? Now, over 100 years later, the real story is still a secret.